We have David McGuire here today from Shark Stewards to talk about his research on kind of megafauna in the ocean and how they're interacting with these MPAs. Are they really sufficient for these animals that have such large geographic ranges? And this is something really important because, as we're looking to, expand MPAs, we have this 30 by 30 goal of getting 30% of U.S. waters protected by 2030. This is an international goal. We have to be really smart about how we do this because we have some really, big keystone species that have really incredibly multi-thousand mile ranges, and we want to make sure we're doing it in a way that protects them. And so David is an expert, has decades of experience on sharks and then other of these charismatic megafauna that we are near and dear to our hearts. So David, thanks so much for joining us, and we're looking forward to your presentation.
Thanks very much. It's great to be with you. I'm glad COVID is over, but it's fun to still be doing these. I just did one yesterday for our group because we are international, and it's fun to connect with people in Guam and Singapore as well as people in the US, but sometimes it's really great to be in the same room. So we'll have questions if you want to put them in the chat or hold them and have an interactive, I hope. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. I've had students that I've advised or interns that have gone to Middlebury. I remember it was the post-naval graduate school when I was at Moss Landing. And I had a friend who was a postdoc there. He's probably almost retired professor. But it's a fantastic campus and great program, and especially a wonderful spot in the world to be located, both for its aesthetic purposes, but especially its maritime history, as well as being a leadership location in marine conservation. So my background is in marine biology from UC Santa Barbara, and then I went on to Moss Landing and then did a degree in environmental toxicology at UC Berkeley and worked for the biology department for a while and looked at toxins in the ocean and how they affected humans as well as animals, and eventually quit my job because we weren't doing any field work anymore, and I was becoming more of an administrator than anything else. And I wanted to get back on the ocean, but I was also on an expedition across the Pacific where we were diving and looking at coral reef ecosystem health. And I was given a camera, but also it was an area in the Tuamotu archipelago in Polynesia. And it's an area that has had and is increasing now high abundance of sharks. But at the time we were seeing fishing, sharks without fins, a major ship with just fins on its around its rail. And I came back to work and got a better camera. We went back and made a film called Shark Stewards of the Reef, which was a documentary to advocate for shark conservation, particularly around the shark fin trade and the ecological benefits of sharks, since that was with Dr. Enrique Sala, who at the time was with Scripps, but has since become very famous conservationist as a National Geographic explorer in residence. That's sort of a backstory. I left Berkeley 20 years ago, so I founded Shark Stewards to first advocate for shark protection in California and Hawaii, and then moved on nationwide and internationally. So who knows what you start. So we are a nonprofit. We're part of the Earth Island Institute based in Berkeley. And our underpinning is really education, applying science towards advocacy and conservation. So doing this is a big part of what we do to leverage actual policy, but also apply science data towards legislation and actually trying to get laws changed, as well as minds and hearts. And sometimes it's true, even politicians, some of them have hearts. I've been able to work with a lot of policymakers over the years, and we still are in some larger policies, but as well as local management. And I'll share that with you later, but I really wanted to talk about marine protection because it's very current. As was just mentioned, 30 by 30 is an international campaign under the Convention of Biological Diversity. There's a UN conference going on right now, and the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea is coming up again for ratification, of which the United States is not a party. But in that is also this 30 by 30 initiative to protect 30% of our planet by 30% under marine protected areas. So my focus really has been on sharks. I've become much more of a shark biologist than I was in the past. I went from micro to macro, and but it's all relevant because sharks as apex predators bioaccumulate, they biomagnify toxins. And in our early experimentation looking at trace elements, even you're seeing microplankton or elements in microplankton or phytoplankton and zooplankton move their way up and increase up into the apex predators like white sharks to the point where they're actually toxic to humans. So elements like methylmercury or compounds like methylmercury and organotoxins end up in our ocean's greatest consumers, not just predators, but also unfortunately our whales, marine mammals. And if people eat them, it comes back to bite us. So I forgot what I titled the talk. It was something about size, some kind of, immature innuendo. But really, it was about sharks and the magnificent white sharks that come back to our coastline every year in the months that we call Sharktober. And so we started celebrating sharks around 20 years ago with our National Marine Sanctuary, actually 16 years ago with public education events. And Jim Toomey, who did Sherman's Lagoon, drew this for us. And we had these annual celebrations of over 1,000 people, family oriented, all about celebrating sharks. And of course, sharks and beer and the Golden Gate, pretty good combination. I did want to show a short video that I did in Hawaii. During COVID, I started shifting work from California, but really in Southeast Asia, we're working in creating marine protected areas as well as following shark trade, which is a big part of what we do in the big trade hubs, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, going into China. Also working with local peoples to create marine protected areas and protect sharks. I had to shift to Hawaii because I couldn't travel during COVID, but kind of fell in love with Hawaii and because we worked with others working to support the first shark fin ban in the US, as well as the Papahanaumokuakea, which is the first marine national monument established by President G.W. Bush in 2015. And also now new marine protected areas that are locally managed and supported. So I have a little video I hope it plays for you. I'll probably just talk over the music. I don't think I can go full frame. But a lot of what we do is try to focus on the beauty of sharks as opposed to the negative connotations that people have and that have been generated by Jaws and Shark Week, and to show people that they are really magnificent and that they are critically important to the health and balance of ocean health. And some of that is through film production, through short video or even film production. Of course, documenting catch and trade helps us apply fisheries regulations through state, federal, or even regional fisheries management organizations, RFMOs, through the United Nations, as well as implementing international trade regulations on body parts, like the gill rakers for manta rays, shark fins that enter the shark fin trade for shark fin soup, primarily in Asia, and other body parts like jaws that are traded commercially, which is a huge market. So the goal really is to change people's perceptions that sharks are important to the ecosystem. They belong there. They are integral components. We shouldn't fear them. We should fear for sharks. And that all parts of the ecosystem, from apex predators down to the algivores, the marine mammals, the invertebrates, are important not only to the health of the ocean, but important for the health of humans. And that's really what marine protected areas embody physically, is that whole ecosystem protection from the fundamental part of the ecosystem, whether it be seagrass beds or coral reefs, all the way up to the apex predators. And of course, we work with youth and to inspire advocacy and action, either through direct action and education or bringing kids out on the water or under the water, or to Sacramento or Washington, D.C., or wherever lawmakers are, to show them the next generation is inheriting what we are leaving them, and we're not leaving such a great deal. But there is a lot of hope. And that's what I hope that I will be able to share in this talk today. The earth is our life's blood, it's our lungs, it's our home for, well, as hominids, maybe a couple million years. Not quite as long as other species like elasmobranchs, been around for almost 400 million years. But it is our life's blood, and most of that earth is ocean. It really should be called planet ocean. It's most of the habitable life on earth. It's largely unexplored. We take more than we give back. We put too much in, and we're starting to feel the impacts, especially in the past couple of decades, from CO2, sea surface temperature rises, greater extraction for oil and gas, and especially recently bottom mining. And yet we've protected very little. In many countries, such as ours, over 40% of our land is protected in national parks, in national refuges, in state parks. And yet our oceans are largely neglected. There's only about 3% of our oceans are truly protected in well-managed, enforced, and studied marine protected areas. And about another 5% are either in action, in legislation, or going to be implemented. And this data comes from the Marine Conservation Institute Marine Protection Atlas. It really comes down to, though, what is a marine protected area? We talked about these goals at the United Nations in 2011 or 2010 at Aichi. The SDG goals, the Sustainable Development Goals 14 in particular, life below water, were established. And I was there. And our goal then was to protect 10% of our oceans by 2010. And most nations committed to that. The US has surpassed that, but most countries have not. And then the Convention of Biological Diversity and Migratory Species and other UN meetings endorsed that and upped it to 30% through scientific data and recommendations that we need to protect more than 10%. A lot of what we need to protect are a lot of the areas that are out of sight, that are critical for critical habitat for large marine megafauna, areas of generation from nutrient flows, for high productivity areas, but also areas for migratory species. So this is from the MCI Marine Protected Atlas. It's mci.org if you want the source. And they do a really good scientifically vetting, looking at the economics, looking at the law, and also aiding countries all around the world in what they call blue parks and blue sparks, which are kind of on the way towards formal marine protected areas. If you focus here on the northeastern Pacific and the west coast of North America, you can see us here in California. There's a pretty high density of MPAs. Baja in Mexico is doing a really great job in the past decade, as is Central America. And then there's areas of large neglect, and in particularly in Southeast Asia, in the Coral Triangle, the area of highest productivity or highest biological diversity, more speciation, and a large population growth that relies on the ocean. Very, very neglected when it comes to marine protected areas. As I said earlier, a lot of the areas that are protected are within sight of land. And for many reasons, especially in the areas that are on the west coast of continents, both in the north and south, these are the areas of highest marine productivity. Off of West Australia and South Australia, off of the west coast of North America and South America, off the west coast of South Africa and South Africa. There's something like 70% of the biomass productivity in the ocean occurs in those areas. So it's also an important place to protect because of coastal upwelling, because of these nice cold northwest winds we get all summer. and those nice foggy days you have in in Monterey, those winds are generating upwelling, bringing deep cold water, nutrient rich waters up, so that it can create that cascade of life, of phytoplankton, zooplankton up to the food chain, which is why we see so many whales, why we have large apex predators and marine mammals, and why we can protect them and want to protect them, because we're able to see them and experience them. Nationally, marine protected areas are under the Marine Sanctuary System, under NOAA, which is part of the Department of Commerce. This started through a sense of outrage in 1965, when most of you, none of you students were alive. I was a little kid, actually, in 1969 when the Santa Barbara oil spill happened, and a couple of years later, walking the beach and having tar on my feet. That instigated outrage among advocates, among students, among professors, and particularly a man named Leon Panetta, who became a congressman in Monterey. He also became the Secretary of State under President Clinton, and he and his son are still active in protecting, particularly the area of Monterey. So the first marine protected area in California was off the Channel Islands, off Santa Barbara, in 1980. The first marine protected area was actually in 1975. So all of these West Coasters, all of these hippies had these teach-ins and had a lot of public outrage, which at the time was resonant and cascading. So that's when the Clean Water Act was implemented, the Clean Air Act, unions, Endangered Species Act, a lot of this public outrage from rivers like the Tioga River in Ohio that caught on fire, like the oil spill off Santa Barbara, like birds dying from DDT. Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, generated this rage in our country, and it generated action. And that's something that has inspired me, and hope I can inspire you, and actually inspired me to actually have a livelihood, being outraged, but also trying to direct energy, including love, towards ocean protection. So our sanctuary system has expanded. There are now 15. There are 2 proposed, including the Chumash Heritage right now. I'll talk about that a little bit. And also one in the Papahanaumokuakea in the Northwest Hawaiian Islands, where we've been working since 2015 with the establishment of the largest marine protected area in US waters and the second in the world. So to define an MPA, there are many. And it's basically an area you protect that's wet, salty. But the goals under the International Union of Conservation of Nature, IUCN, is for the long-term conservation of nature with associated ecosystem services, which is a critical point, and cultural values. We have not always done such a good job in including culture with conservation, or even legislation with culture. And if you look at how we've treated our Native Americans, that's a good example, but that is changing. And I'll talk about that in some of the MPAs that we work in. It's almost serves as a park, an underwater park in some cases, that has recreational value, that has access sometimes for fishing, for diving, but also really a more critically or more strict definition has been refined by the state, which includes several factors, which include natural heritage, educational access, educational as well as research, but to protect and conserve marine life and habitats. And that was really formalized under the Marine Life Protection Act in 1999. But as we were talking earlier, it really started in California in the early 1900s. I learned the Platte Marine Protected Area, which is near Lover's Point, I think, was one of the first marine protected areas. I know Point Lobos Marine Reserve off of Carmel is one of the oldest marine protected areas in Northern California. And you see the benefits of it if you're a diver. And the Scripps Institute, La Jolla Marine Institute, our Marine Refuge, is one of the oldest in the early 1900s. The history of marine protected areas in California has been a bit piecemeal. At one time, there were hundreds of sometimes just a rock administered by different agencies and with different definitions. And it was confusing. It's hard for marine managers to enforce, and it was hard for sometimes consumers who are recreationists who fish or commercial fishermen to understand. Going back first to the more larger scale, so the 30 by 30 has not been well achieved yet. You know, we're 7 years away. 9 countries out of 100 and whatever it is, 65, have achieved 10%. There are only 2 that have achieved 30%. And the first one was Palau, a South Pacific nation that became the first shark sanctuary on the planet that benefited greatly economically from these MPAs through recreation, dive, and shark tourism. And the other is the UK that actually post-Brexit implemented several MPAs in their waters. Only 6.5 of those are within national, I should say most of those, 6.3 of that 8% are within national jurisdictions, meaning within the EEZ, the exclusive economic zone, which was set up under the law of the sea. The US recognizes that, protecting our waters and our shorelines out to 200 miles, including mineral rights. So only less than 1% are on the high seas, which is where a lot of migratory species live. And that has manifest impacts on marine protection species, particularly food crops, or not crops, food species or food industries like large tuna, bluefin tuna, yellowfin tuna, and big-eye tuna, which are all severely fished globally because of those lack of regulations and enforcement on the high seas. In California, we've done a much better job. Starting in 1999, it became a stakeholder-driven process. I just learned that Middlebury College was, in your Blue Center for Ocean Economics, is that BOEBOI, was involved in the economic study, which is also critical for success. You need both the ecological study and understanding, but you also need the economic study. Who are you going to impact? Who is going to suffer? Who's going to lose their job? And who is going to benefit? And that, without those 2 elements, the ecosystem and the economics, we as humans will surely fail in any kind of conservation efforts. This 10-year decadal management review just happened down in Monterey. I was there. We were able to report on some of the work that's been done in the Bay Area. In all, it's actually, the news has been pretty amazing. The first 5 years showed a significant increase, particularly in the Channel Islands, which have been protected longer and have had better study through by UC Santa Barbara, but also PISCO, which is the Partnership of Interdisciplinary Science for Conservation of the Oceans. And they are the ones who are doing the monitoring. They're at Santa Cruz, they're at Stanford, researchers with Fish and Wildlife, researchers at Santa Barbara. And they're out there doing on the water monitoring, under the water monitoring, looking at doing transects, looking at species assemblages, biomass, change over time, and change with environmental impacts like sea surface temperature. This is a 5-year study. Samantha Murray is down at Cal State Monterey, a friend of mine. She's been really involved. She did a survey of some of the work that Cassell and Carr did in the mid-90s, looking at the benefits inside marine protected areas versus outside marine protected areas in biomass, but also targeted species and untargeted species. So what was interesting was that they also saw an increase in biomass of targeted species outside the MPAs, that meaning commercially fished. And we believe that was partially because of what is called the spillover effect. The non-targeted species, the 2 kind of were fairly close, but in general, the trends, if you did a regression, you'd see an upward increase in biomass and untargeted and targeted species. You saw a dramatic increase in species that had suffered from commercial and recreational extraction, like the spiny lobsters, and the sheep's head, that increased in some cases 400% in these MPAs over a 5-year period. In 10 years, we've seen a significant increase throughout the state because the MLPA was implemented in 4 different regions throughout the state, starting in the central region, south central, sorry, the Santa Barbara, Ventura coastline, the Channel Islands, down to northern LA, because again, those islands had been protected as part of our national park, as part of our state parks, as part of areas of study, as also existing marine protected areas, and the first National Marine Sanctuary. So they were already receiving some benefit, both from science, but also from protection. And we're seeing those recover more quickly. But the other areas in the state, including up here in North Central California and all the way down to Southern California, you're seeing a benefit from these MPAs. So they're broken up in the state law, it went from about 30 different definitions to 4 really, but no-take reserves, which are red on the map. This is your region that goes down to Point Conception. Here's Monterey Bay. There's Lover's Point, Moss Landing, and the estuary, the Elkhorn Creek or slough that is protected. The red are no-take. The blue are marine conservation areas, which there's some recreational commercial take, generally harvestable species like salmon, not now, but in some cases halibut, some cases rockfish can be fished seasonally or just in the confines of those SMCAs. Those are usually placed right next to a marine reserve, so there is a place of refuge for those species that can recover in the no-take zones. And then there are the marine conservation areas, which allowed for sort of a hangover of history in a way, and also gave a nod to duck hunters. So one is in Morro Bay. Drake's Bay is actually probably being phased out. But some of the estuaries that allow duck hunting, but don't allow fishing or commercial fishing inside of them, but there is some take allowed. And that's a very small percentage in our state MPA. So 16% of our state waters, 124 in this, what is called an ecosystem connected network of marine protected areas. This is a national experiment. It's a global experiment led by scientists in California and fisheries managers, saying that we can go in, and we're going to go from the Oregon border to the Mexican border, and we're going to protect at least out to 3 miles in some cases where our state water's in, some of these areas that have high productivity and unique species, or in many cases endangered species like sea otters. This is a recent publication that was in that decadal review that shows since 2007 through 2020 a significant impact, or increase, I should say, in biomass per unit effort in this case, so catch per unit effort. And a lot of this work was done on rockfish. Rick Starr, who is works for the state, but he was a professor at Moss Landing. But a lot of these researchers are local and academics, but also work in what's called the California Collaborative Fisheries Research Program, funded by the state, and in some cases, the Ocean Protection Council. And it shows that for these species, you're using less effort to catch fish that are marketable in many cases. So there's less effort for more biomass, meaning there's a lot more fish. In many cases, these fish are returned after they're caught. So the fish are larger inside the MPAs, they're more abundant, but also when they're larger, they actually are more fecund. They have higher reproductive success, and they have higher reproductivity, or more eggs in the case of spawners. So the older they are, they call them big old fecund females, big old fertile females. So in the cases of, for example, black sea bass, giant sea bass, other large fish have more larvae or more spawn and more larvae, so they are able to reproduce more. So it's important to protect these large spawners, or in the case of sharks also, which actually are less fecund and have much longer generational periods as well as reproductive onset to protect the big females. They're more resilient, some studies have shown, against marine perturbations like the marine heat waves. And the overall opinion of fishermen is that they are better and they are working. There are some grumblers out there. There are some people who want them to be open. Some commercial fishermen have lost income, but they were already losing income, and many of them recognize that. This is just an example of the spillover effect. And again, going back to that map, looking at the California current, which runs down from Alaska, essentially, down to Washington, British Columbia, Washington, Oregon, all the way down to Baja, that cold water that generates upwelling, as well as also cooler temperate waters, and also the Davidson countercurrent off Southern California and the Southern California bight. Those currents distribute the spawn of not only vertebrates, but also invertebrates like sea cucumbers or other organisms like lobsters, or animals that actually spawn and broadcast spawn that go into the currents, or larvae that can go either into refugia to the next marine protected area, or they can recruit and colonize new areas that can be fished. And so you're seeing these areas that are carried by the currents where they're protected. A fisherman can fish here, and then the juveniles can grow up and the adults can spawn, and carrying that current to recruit and regenerate areas off our coastline that have been overfished or impacted by extraction. So this is the only slide that has a lot of words, because I borrowed this from not Baykeeper, Heal the Bay down in Southern California as a result of this decadal review. But basically, the take home is they're working, they're working from public perception as well as ecologically. Some species did not benefit as well. The preponderance of species that had been fished commercially that could withstand small areas, not sharks, areas that are beyond large migration patterns, which I'll get into very soon, did benefit. Other species did not. The take home is that we did not include our tribal brothers and sisters, particularly in Central and Southern California. That is being repaired. There's a tribal indigenous council. There is now the Chumash Northern Tribal Council, who's involved with the Chumash National Marine Sanctuary that is proposed right now. And there's a big movement to try to get our Native Americans involved, and to the coast also, because they do have traditional knowledge and also traditional cultural and even in some cases genetic association with the waters and the lands that we colonists are now living in. Future MPA research really needs to prioritize climate change. There was a study that was done recently, and it was a part of this decadal review that's in the literature now, that actually showed during that blob event in 2014 that went into as late as 2019, they were not as resilient as first thought. In many cases, for example, the bull kelp off of Northern California. And so focusing on climate change and the impacts like ocean acidification really needs to be considered when you are considering species as well as marine protection. And support research with new technologies like eDNA, with new remote sensing, using new tools for detection and help enforcement and compliance. So I have a quiz, a little bit of break, and I'm going to go on to sharks. Where do white sharks go on vacation? Okay, I'm going to wait 1 second. If you want to put in the chat, I'll give you a ride to the Farallon Islands this weekend. Finland. Okay, Rachel, I think you got a ride to the Farallones, because that's where I'm going. I want to talk about marine protected areas and the efficacy of marine protected areas for migratory species. So does size matter when we're talking to marine protected areas, but also when we're talking about species? When you have a large animal like a white shark, it cannot live in these relatively depauperate zones in the middle of the oceans. year round. They require areas of high productivity, such as off our California marine protected areas, off of our refuge off the Farallon Islands, Año Nuevo, and other rookeries of large marine mammals. And so work that was done under the Block Lab by Sal Jorgensen and Taylor Chappell and others through satellite tagging saw that there's this mysterious area in the north central Pacific, about a little bit beyond halfway between here and Hawaii, actually right on the edge of that Great Pacific Garbage Patch in the Gyre, where these sharks are aggregating. There's a lot more data. This is an old graphic by Mercury News, but there's since been over 100 sharks that have been tracked and looking at depth profiles as well. And it looks like these sharks are feeding on giant squid out there. They're not fasting, but they are only the adult white sharks in the Northeast Pacific population. This population is segregated genetically by a couple 100,000 years from its most closely related population in Australia. There are only a few hotspots, even though white sharks are pan-global. They're primarily subtropical and temperate, but they do venture into the tropics. Going back to traditional knowledge and working in Hawaii, I was able to do a little research and talk to some elders, and they said, look, we knew white sharks were here. Our ancestors knew. They were in our myths, as well as some of our war clubs. They used the teeth. But also, through photography, a friend of mine took that picture that I showed the slide behind. Darren Verbeck is a friend of mine. We're working on not only a film, but also looking at pattern recognition with AI, so matching photographs. And Darren was able to photograph the first white shark photograph on the main Hawaiian Islands. But through the tagging data by TOP, the tagging of Pacific or pelagic predators, Block and others have been able to determine that sharks do also go all the way to Hawaii and then come back every year for what we call Sharktober in the late summer, early fall. And this is also overlaps with the time that we see more human interactions. Where we live is what's called the Red Triangle, and that's the area bounded by Bodega Bay to the north, or Point Arena, and the Farallones out to the west of us, and down to Monterey, where there's about 80% of human white shark fatalities have occurred in California. Now, that's not really a lot. Over the past around not even 100 years since we've really been collecting accurate data, there have been only about 20 or so fatalities. So they're very rare, and interactions are less than 100 or so, 112, I think. But if you look at fishing, and this is from Global Fish Watch, if you look at, here's the west coast of South America, and then up to, am I right? Yeah, no, that's Asia, and I mean, that's Africa and Asia, North Europe, that is. Here we are in North America. This shows the density of fishing boats by their broadcast from what are called AIS, or Automated Information System. And under Regional Fisheries Management Organization, or UN rules, tuna fleets that are under treaties need to have these on. Many don't, through what is called IUU fishing, or illegal, unregulated, unreporting fishing, about 20%. But you see where the fishermen line up, and a lot of those are out where these migratory species are. So between here and Hawaii, where those white sharks are migrating, not coincidentally, where a lot of whales migrate as well, or other marine mammals such as elephant seals and other species such as yellowfin tuna that do these migratory cycles between the west coast of the Asian continent, east coast of the Asian continent, and the South Central and Pacific and North Pacific. So there are thousands and thousands of long lines out there that are baited and hooked that are killing thousands or hundreds of thousands of species of sharks. So even though we can protect them here in an area of California, which is again about 852 square miles, that only goes out to 3 miles in some cases, we're talking postage stamps of high productivity, but they really only protect the big marine megafauna when they are in them, it might benefit them when they're foraging. Certainly it does for example, a mako shark or a blue shark, a fish eater that goes to the MPAs, particularly the offshore MPAs, and enjoy this increase in fish biomass. But white sharks, which adults predominantly prey on marine mammals, don't benefit as much, other than they're getting the bottom-up effect in this case. But when they're out offshore, they are vulnerable to these long-line fishing boats that are out set for tuna and swordfish, but are killing thousands of sharks as bycatch, or also through depredation for the shark fin trade. This is an interesting study that I encountered while I was researching this talk, showing there are about 8 shark sanctuaries in the Pacific, and yet these sharks are also encountering fisheries that are not fishing for sharks, but have high mortality. What isn't shown in here are hammerheads, which are critically endangered and have a mortality, a post-catch mortality of up to from 90 to 100%. Silky sharks, which are an endangered shark, are caught. This is off Australia. This is the Coral Triangle, so west of Papua New Guinea and Solomon Islands, where there are large yellowfin tuna, but also areas of high recreation for scuba divers. You're seeing these sharks that are supposed to be protected are getting killed in the hundreds of thousands. So really, who is protected? Whale sharks in the past few years have been coming up to San Diego and up from Baja. These are critically endangered species, killed for their meat, but also for their fins. Easy to hunt, were hunted out and also killed as bycatch. They benefit from marine protected areas. We hope that they will benefit from a swimway in the Gulf of California, where we're working with a nonprofit in Mexico that will protect a large migratory swathway, because they're going to basically be running from Cabo Polmo or from La Paz. They have to go up to Loreto and Bahia de Los Angeles, where there are MPAs, but not big enough to protect them while they're migrating. Broad-nosed seven-gill sharks, which give birth in the San Francisco Bay, typically will go down into deeper waters. The males we know through tagging and now photographic identification down in Baja and La Jolla are entrained accidentally as bycatch, but since they're not targeted commercially, at least off our coast, they are benefiting from marine protected areas. Small sharks that are localized, like hound sharks, like leopard sharks, do benefit greatly. Swell sharks that live in the rocky intertidal or rocky subtidal, that is, also benefit from MPAs. Some of the flat sharks, the rays and the skates, are benefiting from MPAs. And anecdotally, species like white sharks that primarily consume on rays when they're young down in Southern California are also benefiting from not only fisheries protection, but also protection from for their prey source, seeing them recover. Soup fin sharks, which is a hound shark, Galeas galeoranus, is also gives birth and is a nursery in the San Francisco Bay. Unfortunately, not doing so well. They're entrained in fisheries. Also, they get killed for their fins for the Asian shark fin soup trade. They're doing well off of our coastline, in the immediate California coastline, but they are in a commercial fishery offshore up in British Columbia and get caught in gill net. So MPAs, not doing so good for them. Short fin mako sharks, nah. Highly migratory. These are endangered. They're closed off the eastern seaboard. They're protected on the western seaboard. They migrate 15,000 kilometers annually a year. The fastest swimming shark that fishes some of the fastest swimming fish, like yellowfin, and they are entrained as bycatch, but also coveted for their fins for shark fin soup, but also end up in the food trade as well. So MPAs, not so good. Thresher sharks, not so good. Blue sharks, no. 20 million in the shark fin trade until we were able to protect them under CITES. And so these fish, in this case, or other species like marine mammals that migrate these large distances, are exposed on those high seas, which are about 61% of our ocean. It's why it's important to have these conventions like the law of the sea, like these UN fisheries management organizations that we work in, and we go and we show data and we show pictures and we show movies to try to get delegates to vote to protect sharks, which we were able to do in Panama last year and protect over 100 species from trade under the Convention of International Trade of Endangered Species. Spiny dogfish doing okay off our coast, one of the largest fish shark, but also one of the largest, most fecund shark. These sharks are not doing so well in the Atlantic. They're eaten as fish and chips. They're eaten now for their fins, which are tiny, but they're bottom trawled as well. They're doing okay in the Pacific, but they live primarily in deeper water. So MPAs are not yet at the bottom of the ocean. This is something that is high on the priority list for marine protection, for minerals, for sensitive habitat, such as our offshore pinnacles, like our seamounts, the Davidson Seamount, for example, the Ferdinand Seamount that will be protected under the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary. And these species will benefit from trawling in those deep sea habitats. Other species that are fished commercially or not commercially that are near shore are doing better and will benefit, like some of the rays. But one of the things that is difficult to protect in marine protected areas is climate change and sea surface temperatures. I know I'm running out of time, so I don't want to belabor this other than climate change is really having an effect everywhere in the ocean, everywhere on the planet. And this shows a northern shift during those blobs from green is off of Mexico, blue is off of North America. And the species have lost as much as 10 or 15% of their preferred habitat, in some cases almost 40% during these high surface temperature events, but it's increased northward. So you're seeing a northern shift of species, including these migratory species, in this case, 2 species of sharks, but also whales and seabirds following their prey. There is hope. We're working in Hawaii. We've been instrumental in supporting local Hawaiians, as well as trying to provide science to protect sharks, first shark fin trade ban in the world. Also, there's no shark fishing commercially. There's a strong cultural connection to sharks, as well as seeing sharks through ecotourism. There's a strong economic benefit. Our new focus is on the oceanic whitetip, which is the most endangered large shark on the planet. It was the most abundant vertebrate on the planet in the ocean, and now it is the most threatened. We're looking to uplist these on the Endangered Species Act, as well as under CITES Appendix 1. But Hawaii has eliminated wire leaders so that sharks can chew them off in those longline fisheries. We were able to help leverage that in Vietnam last December in the Regional Fisheries Management Organization. We're looking to do this in the Eastern Pacific and in the Atlantic this year and next year to support not only these sharks, but others. Here's something that you can learn about as students. You can take action. Next week, there are 3 public comment periods. One is online. If you go to our website or the sanctuary's website listed here, you can write. You can actually go on to a Zoom and comment. And this is the first truly tribally driven, culturally National Marine Sanctuary. The Papahanaumokuakea was supported by Native Hawaiians, but no Hawaiians live in the Northwest Hawaiian Islands. They go there, they pray there. But this sanctuary that will protect, as I said earlier, a large part of the Monterey coastline down to the Channel Islands, hopefully to connect that Gaviota shoreline and in San Luis Obispo to become our 16th National Marine Sanctuary. Sanctuaries do allow fishing, but they protect from resource extraction. This will ban oil extraction. It'll also increase protection on bottom mining. It also protects some of those deep sea pinnacles of high abundance and diversity. There's hope in that we were able to pass the Drift Net Bycatch Reduction Act, introduced by Senator Feinstein, signed by President Biden last year. This is the last drift net fishery in U.S. waters that kills more sharks and also seabirds, marine mammals, than it does fish. Now we're working on a set net fishery that is still occurring off of Santa Barbara Ventura, and that's being heard by the Pacific Fisheries Management Council. We were able to protect many species, including this flagship species that we've been working with, one of the most abundant sharks that I grew up with, and that were disappearing in my lifetime, now hopefully will return the blue shark, that whole family of the requiem shark family, the Carcharinidae, in addition to all the hammerheads, all the guitar fishes, are being protected primarily from the shark fin trade. We work in community science. If you're a diver, you can help in tide pool surveys as well as underwater. We have a project called Shark Watch, which engages the community. If you scan that QR code, we developed a program with students here at Berkeley to try to get community data on movements as well as catch, as well as shark stranding, so looking at disease. And this is some of the data that we've gleaned off social media. So we're also looking at social media collection of data towards catch and people catching also protected species, species that are doing quite well, but also protected species and illegal to catch. And we shared this with California Fish and Wildlife last year. We bring people out into our sanctuaries, marine protected areas, and do what I'm doing now, but actually try to see the wildlife that we're protecting and trying to talk and talking about to continue protection. Here's a number of things. You go to our website, you can volunteer and join us and help online or in person. And I want to thank you for listening. And of course, thank my sponsors and grantors who fund us. And of course, you can find us and all that jazz, social media, but I don't do TikTok. So thank you. I'm going to stop sharing and open it up to any questions. Look in the chat here. We only have a few minutes, but
hey, well,
there
thanks,
is one
David.
question I see. Will implementing the high sea treaties feasibly protect some of the more migratory species? That is the goal. Is that the outcome? The migratory species treaties have not been so successful when it comes to tuna, which is really what they're geared at. What has worked more are the regional fisheries management organizations and applying trade sanctions. We've been working on trying to get the US to sign the treaty, and we have heard directly that verbatim, the US does not do well with treaties. We don't entreat well, which was shown pretty well when we started to colonize the US. We tend to break them. We also treaties are broken by other countries. And so not to blame our regulators, but sometimes treaties quite often are unenforceable. The United Nations, these regional fisheries management organizations, they convene, they have scientists, and they allow public input. I go to these, I register, and we are able to talk and advocate as well as expose some of these countries like Taiwan, like Indonesia, like Japan, who actually are in violation of their agreements, or Spain in the Atlantic by taking more fish than they agree. So they're a little bit more transparent sometimes than treaties allow. In any rate, I would say that more protection or more treaties are a good place to start, but applying really good data is the best way to apply policy. And we see that, unfortunately, primarily through overfishing. We look at fish stock decline and we decide we can't fish as much, or we stop fishing in some cases, like the bluefin tuna in the Western Pacific, because we're fishing, or the Western Atlantic, I'm sorry, where the bluefin tuna are crashing, trying to protect these migratory species.
Hey, David, I have a quick question. You know, I'm kind of a student of language and how we describe things. And, you know, I've always noticed, you know, things like bycatch, incidental take are these kind of really antiseptic, neutral terms for the slaughter of whales and dolphins and sharks by accident, you know? And I'm just wondering, have you ever given any thought to more evocative language that we could use? Because again, you say, oh, bycatch, incidental take, it doesn't get people emotionally charged, but when you're killing whales and dolphins and turtles and sharks in horrific ways when you weren't supposed to get them, I think we need some better language. So have you given any thought to that?
Yeah, well, I mean, usually we term it as by kill, because it's not by catch. Like, for example, hammerheads, the catch rate mortality, which is a fisheries management term, is usually 90 to 100%. So you might as well call it kill. You catch it, you kill it. And that's the problem with many sharks, because they stress out. They get these lactic acid accumulation. They also have these hormones that increase their heart rate, increase. Sometimes they just stop breathing, which is kind of tragic. I think for public support, those kind of things work. If you're Greenpeace or Oceana, sometimes even, who does good work, it gets the donate now button. If you're talking to fisheries management, I think you need to speak the language of science. And I try to do both. But when I'm in those management meetings, I have to speak there because we come from, I hope, a position of credibility using data. Otherwise, you're dismissed. The shark huggers can get out there, the people who dive and ride sharks, and they love them, or they know them, or they equate to them or associate. I'm sure they do, but a lot of times that doesn't resonate when it comes to people on the other side who are saying, I'm losing $100,000 if I can't fish for these sharks. You need to come in and say, well, we're going to bring in $100,000 through ecotourism services or more. We're going to bring in science that shows the economic benefits to other fisheries by protecting apex predators. But it is important, I think, to realize, and I think looking at, protected areas, there's no lines in the ocean. And that's a big challenge, right? We can try to protect it, but without enforcement or education, it's not going to be protected. I don't know, really. I am very passionate, and it is disturbing. I mean, it really is. We are at an ocean crux. We are at a global crux for many reasons. And I think climate change, we're getting it, I hope. And that's going to impact everything. But that language of climate change, that rising thermometer, applies to most marine life and other endangered species.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. No, it was good. I think Jack put a question in the chat if you want to address that.
I mean, it really could be called murder, and I guess we should think about that as consumers.
More accurate.
And a lot of our media, and I didn't really talk about shark fin, and I can really talk about the economics as well as the cultural and sociological factors, because we had a chapter in China. I've spent a lot of time in Asia. We have a whole media program directed in Chinese at Chinese about just sustainability and their language of what they're eating, because it's euphemistic. A lot of times shark fin translates as fish wing. They don't even know it comes from a shark. There's a lot of ignorance. So labeling, vernacular is very important. And I think, sometimes passionate language, definitely. So there was another question from Jack. What do you attribute the success of the past CITES to? And what role does AI have to play with tracking conservation? I'm not sure what you mean about attribute the success at the 2022 CITES. Before this last CITES, there were 64 species of elasmobranchs protected. There are thousands of plants and animals listed under CITES. I think the big thing was definitely the shark fin awareness. When I first made my film on shark finning, it was 2016 or 2019. It came out. Shark Water, another film. I helped put on the San Francisco Ocean Film Festival. We screen films. You almost hear about shark finning in every shark fin film now. There's been a dramatic awareness to the point where really shark finning is less of an issue than shark fishing for the sharks and the fins. But the shark fins, particularly of silky sharks, hammerhead sharks, the fins are so valuable. Oceanic white tips, those fins are worth thousands of dollars. And unscrupulous or indigenous fishermen who don't make much money will sell to the traders for the fins. So we recognize, but I have to give credit to Panama also. Panama did a tremendous job hosting CITES, but also leading the scientific discussion, and also putting their money where their mouth was by increasing their marine protected areas and becoming a leader in conservation in Central America. So much that I can't wait to go back and work with this whole Latin American consortium of nations, including Mexico, that is really stepping up to be leaders in shark and marine protected area conservation. What role does AI have? I think it's extraordinary. We've been working with something, it was called Wild Book. It's called eShark now. if you go on our YouTube channel, I gave a whole talk about white sharks, and the early recognition was just through their fins and staring at the fins and matching them. Back in the days of slides, even with Scott Anderson and Peter Pyle. Now with this AI, it benefits that you don't have to stare at the same shark through a murky photograph, especially underwater. You don't have to get more than one area like some of the traditional pattern matching is used. For example, we're working with tiger sharks with a colleague who is using traditional matching. We're using AI. AI is faster, and if you get enough data in, it's more accurate in recognizing individuals. So with our photographs, it's like, oh, I'm not sure if it's that shark or not. The fins look the same, but if you have AI, and AI is important as well, because if you get constant sightings, for example, this humpback whale, actually pigment patterns change over time, or sometimes even short term, like mantas. I just learned at this manta conference that when some mantas are feeding, their markings come out. And I didn't know this. Actually, I did observe it, but it didn't occur to me. So AI is smart enough if you get enough data. So, it's only as smart as the data you put into it. And that's the problem with AI. So the more photographs you get in, the better it can be. So the more people, ideally, for example, our 7-gill shark study, we're really working with divers in La Jolla because the water is clear enough. And there's a dependable aggregation of these sharks that come from our estuaries down there in the summer. And we've got about 70 individuals identified. But the more people take photos, you could maybe even get rid of catching a shark and tagging it. If you get enough people taking photos along the coast, you don't need to tag a shark. You're getting a movement pattern, or at least temporal. That shark has returned a year later. It left. We didn't know exactly where it went, but there it is again. And that gives management great management data.
That's fascinating. Great stuff. Is there any, maybe just have time for one more quick question if anyone has something for David here? Jack, real quick.
Yeah, sorry. Just another kind of shark tagging question is with tagging specifically, you mentioned like the discombobulation that leads to death with like hammerheads and stuff. With tagging, is there really ever risk of like throwing off a shark in like that specific way?
Yeah, well, what is it? Occam's razor. You influence the system you study. Of course. It's why you want to do less harm. It's why universities have animal care use committees that approve of any methodologies. The problem is with yahoos that get out there and do it for sport, and I think actually lazy scientists who use recreational fishermen that justify the fishermen to go out and catch and release. And it's like, oh, we're catching and releasing. You see this a lot at shark tournaments on the East Coast, and there's high mortality. I can see the fact that's lost data, the animal's dead. If you're a graduate student, you don't have the money to get out there. But there's a group that I won't name that's really about Shark Week. It's kind of been banned from the West Coast, but they are invasive in their tagging. They lift the shark out of the water. We have documented them killing sharks, white sharks in particular, a protected species, and they're doing it for some science that's valuable, but really a lot of media and a lot of social media. Where's Lydia? Oh boy, let's just watch where this shark is now. That's really not really great science. It's not relevant sometimes for good management. And so, the do less harm principle when you're studying an animal is important. When we tag sharks, including, when I've helped tag white sharks, you don't bring them out of the water. You bring them alongside. Sometimes you don't catch them at all. With a white shark that's attracted to an attractant, and we don't do that because we don't have that permit or do that work. But with 7-gills, we bring them into a hammock and put them upside down into this a catatonic state, intubate them with water. You time it, and yeah, they're stressed sometimes, but you sort of re-engage them and then allow them to swim away. So yeah, there is impact. And I think that needs to be considered in any kind of tagging study. And a lot of times people want to tag sharks. It looks cool. It's fun. I don't like fishing, so I don't really like it. It's boring, you know, until you get to the shark alongside, but some people love to fish. But it does need to be considered in science. And if we can use less harmful mechanisms using technology, then we should.
That's awesome. Well, look, David, thanks so much for this. I think Rachel's proposed a little shark movie night later in
I
this.
love it.
We might have to get some of your films to preview here with some popcorn here.
Yeah, and I'll have my new film, but I have access to some great shark films, and
Awesome.
we've done shark films nights in the past, actually at Berkeley and other campuses. So I'll come down. Love Monterey, love Santa Cruz.
All right, well, we'll get you, then we can get you in person. So hey, look, great work, and thanks for the insight and all your efforts on these these majestic species over the decades. Much appreciated, and we'll hope to see you in person shortly. Let's give David a nice round of applause here. All right, everybody, have a great rest of your evening, and again, thanks, David, much appreciated.
Hey, thank you. Goodbye.
Cheers.